Trade Mediator Ashford listened to these observations with the kind of patient attention that suggested he was either deeply fascinated by alien economics or mentally calculating compound interest rates. He maintained perfect posture, his tablet balanced precisely on his lap, with an expression of polite interest that never wavered. When the formal complaints had been registered according to proper protocol, he stood with the fluid economy of movement that came from spending considerable time in variable gravity commercial stations. "Distinguished adjudicators," he began, his voice carrying just enough warmth to suggest genuine respect, without crossing into the kind of obsequiousness that might be mistaken for weakness. "The Terran Commercial Collective appreciates the concerns raised by the Vorthark Syndicate. We take all commercial regulations seriously and remain committed to fair and transparent business practices." What followed was a masterclass in economic Aikido. Every accusation was acknowledged, contextualized, and gently redirected toward subsections of galactic trade law that apparently no one else had bothered to read. When the Vorthak complained about human shipping rates, Ashford produced detailed cost-benefit analyses showing that Terran efficiency gains were passed directly to consumers. When the Ethereals questioned human market penetration strategies, he referenced the Galactic Free Trade Amendments of 2394, which granted all species equal access to commercial opportunities regardless of their age or technological development. The assembled arbitrators began to show signs of the peculiar frustration that comes from being lectured on subjects they considered themselves experts in by someone they had assumed was fundamentally inferior. The Vorthak's crystalline form began to resonate at frequencies that indicated severe irritation. The Ethereal's probability pattern started shifting toward configurations that universal translators marked as barely contained condescension. The Silicon Confederacy's geometric matrices began forming shapes that looked suspiciously like profanity in 17 different mathematical languages. "Mediator Ashford," High Adjudicator Zethkol said, his harmonic frequencies shifting to tones that suggested the commercial equivalent of grinding teeth, "your species demonstrates a remarkable talent for creative interpretation of established business ethics. We prefer to think of it as thorough preparation," Ashford replied with a smile that could have been used to sell insurance to immortal beings. "The Terran Commercial Collective believes that understanding the complete scope of galactic trade law enables us to serve our customers more effectively, while maintaining full regulatory compliance." Senior Arbitrix Quellinara's quantum fluctuations began to approach patterns that made nearby electronic devices uncomfortable. "Perhaps what the galaxy requires is less human service and more human acknowledgement of commercial hierarchies that have maintained stability for millennia." "The hierarchies," Chief Moderator Brickstar added, their geometric form coalescing into something that might have been a disapproving polyhedron that ensured orderly commerce, long before your species discovered the concept of profit. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees, though the environmental controls registered no change. Trade Mediator Ashford's professional smile remained perfectly calibrated, but something had shifted in his posture. The change was so subtle that most species would have dismissed it entirely, but the few who noticed found themselves suddenly reminded that humans were, technically speaking, the only species in the galaxy that had developed economics and warfare simultaneously. "I see," Ashford said, his voice maintaining its commercial warmth, while somehow conveying the kind of subtext that made quarterly reports seem like battle plans. "The established hierarchies, yes. Let's discuss those in detail." The arrival of the consortium's military attaché transformed the routine commercial dispute into something far more serious. General Vex Thor of the hegemonic consortium swept into the chamber with the kind of presence that suggested he had personally conquered several markets before most species had figured out supply and demand. His species, the hegemonics, represented what happened when evolution decided that the universe needed beings who looked like they had been designed by committee to be as intimidating as possible. "Honored arbitrators," Vex Thor rumbled, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made stock prices fluctuate, "I bring evidence of systematic economic terrorism perpetrated by the so-called Terran Commercial Collective." The chamber fell silent, Economic terrorism was serious business in a galaxy where commerce was supposed to prevent conflicts rather than cause them. The fact that such accusations were being leveled against humanity, the newest and supposedly most naive member of the galactic economic community, sent ripples of shock through the assembled arbitrators. Vexthor activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber with charts, graphs, and what appeared to be the financial records of several major consortium enterprises. The data painted a picture of systematic market manipulation on a scale that should have been impossible for a species that had only been engaged in interstellar commerce for 3 decades. The humans, Vexthor continued, his predatory grin revealing the kind of teeth that had evolved for tearing through both flesh and profit margins, have been systematically undermining consortium commercial interests across 17 sectors. They have used unfair pricing strategies, impossible logistics solutions, and customer service standards that approach the realm of science fiction. The assembled arbitrators turned to look at Trade Mediator Ashford, expecting to see the kind of shocked denial that would be appropriate for a species accused of such sophisticated economic warfare. Instead, they found him studying the holographic display with the kind of professional interest that a master chef might show when examining a particularly impressive soufflé. "Fascinating," Ashford murmured, his diplomatic mask beginning to develop hairline cracks. "Though I notice General Vexthor has neglected to mention that these commercial interests include several monopolistic practices that violate at least 12 different sections of galactic fair trade legislation." Fair trade. Vexthor's laugh was the sound of a calculator being fed through a paper shredder. "The consortium has maintained commercial dominance for 800 years. We define fair trade in this sector." "Ah," Ashford said, and his professional smile finally began to show signs of strain. "I see. So when the consortium eliminates competition through predatory pricing and market manipulation, that's simply good business. But when humans compete effectively using superior efficiency and customer service, that's economic terrorism." The change in the chamber's atmosphere was palpable. The arbitrators began to sense that something fundamental had shifted in the commercial dynamic they thought they understood. Trade Mediator Ashford was no longer the polite, deferential human they had grown accustomed to patronizing in matters of galactic commerce. Something else was emerging, something that made the primitive parts of their brains whisper urgent warnings about predators and the wisdom of not cornering creatures that might be significantly more dangerous than they appeared. "The consortium has earned its position through centuries of superior commercial development," High Adjudicator Zethkol interjected, though his crystalline harmonics had shifted to frequencies that suggested he was beginning to question the wisdom of this particular line of reasoning. "Earned," Ashford repeated, his voice carrying a note of curiosity that somehow managed to sound more threatening than direct accusations. "Based on what, exactly? Commercial superiority? The assumption that older equals better? The belief that established market dominance grants natural authority over newer competitors?" The chamber had gone very quiet. Even the background hum of the station's economic data processing systems seemed muted, as if the universe itself was holding its breath to see what would happen when someone finally challenged the assumptions that had governed galactic commerce for millennia. "For the past 30 years, Ashford continued, his tone remaining conversational, but with an undertone that made everyone present suddenly aware of their species' current debt-to-galaxy ratios, "the Terran Commercial Collective has participated in galactic commerce under the assumption that we were joining a community of species committed to fair competition and mutual economic prosperity." He stood and began to move around the chamber, his steps measured and precise. "We have been cooperative, we have been respectful, we have observed your commercial protocols, acknowledged your market hierarchies, and generally conducted our business according to the established practices that apparently define civilized commerce." Senior Arbitrix Quelnara's quantum patterns were fluctuating at frequencies that suggested deep algorithmic uncertainty. "Mediator Ashford, surely you're not implying that—" "What I'm implying," Ashford interrupted, his voice cutting through the Arbitrix probability fields like a leveraged buyout through a pension fund, "is that the Terran Commercial Collective has been operating under a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of galactic economics." The holographic display was still active, showing the consortium's financial records. Ashford gestured toward it with the casual precision of someone who had spent considerable time analyzing similar market data for purposes that had nothing to do with friendly competition. "These enterprises," he said, his voice taking on the clipped, efficient tone of a hostile takeover briefing, "represent a coordinated effort to maintain artificial scarcity across multiple sectors while suppressing technological innovation that might threaten established profit margins. The consortium has been operating cartels that violate 17 different sections of galactic antitrust legislation." The assembled arbitrators stared at him. This was not the trade mediator Ashford they knew. This was someone else entirely. Someone who spoke with the quiet authority of someone who had seen market analyses that would give commercial regulators nightmares. "The Terran Commercial Collective's response," Ashford continued, "has been measured, legal, and designed to maximize consumer benefit while maintaining healthy profit margins. We have entered markets through legitimate competition. We have provided superior products and services at competitive prices. We have followed every regulation in the Galactic Commercial Code." General Vextor snarled, his predatory instincts finally engaging. "You dare lecture the consortium on commerce? Your species was bartering with shiny beads when we were establishing interstellar trade networks." The change in Ashford's expression was subtle but unmistakable. The professional mask didn't just crack, it shattered entirely, revealing something underneath that made every economic survival instinct in the chamber start calculating the fastest route to financial shelter. "Bartering with shiny beads," Ashford repeated, his voice carrying a note of genuine amusement that somehow managed to be more terrifying than fiscal rage. "That's an interesting historical perspective. Tell me, General, what do you know about human economic development?" The question hung in the air like a margin call. Vextor's predatory confidence began to falter as he realized that the human he had been threatening was looking at him with the kind of professional assessment that suggested his entire species was being evaluated for acquisition potential. "I know that humans are young, inexperienced, and operating on commercial principles that are centuries behind established galactic standards," Vextor growled, though his voice carried less conviction than before. "Young." Ashford nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, compared to most species in this tribunal, humans are relatively new to interstellar commerce." "Inexperienced?" He tilted his head slightly, the gesture carrying an implied question mark that somehow suggested the answer might involve hostile takeovers. "That's a fascinating assumption. Operating on outdated principles?" Ashford's smile returned, but it was nothing like the professional expression he had worn before. This was the smile of someone who had just realized that the safety locks on the global economy had been disengaged. "Let me share some information that might be relevant to this discussion," he said, his voice carrying the casual tone of someone reading quarterly earnings reports. "The Terran Commercial Collective currently maintains active trade relationships with 847 different species across 12,000 star systems. Our gross galactic product exceeds the combined economic output of the next 7 largest commercial entities. We control approximately 60% of interstellar shipping, 45% of advanced manufacturing, and 72% of what you might call emerging technology markets." The numbers hit the assembled arbitrators like a financial tsunami. The Vorthak Syndicate, one of the most economically powerful species in the galaxy, controlled perhaps 8% of interstellar commerce. The consortium, which had built its entire civilization around commercial dominance, maybe 12% at their peak. "Honor isolation," Ashford continued, his tone remaining conversational while delivering information that was fundamentally recontextualizing everything the tribunal thought they knew about galactic commerce, "is based on the principle of maximum efficiency, applied with surgical precision to market opportunities. We believe that the most effective way to dominate a market is to provide superior products and services at prices that make competition economically impossible." Chief Moderator Brickstar's geometric matrices were flickering rapidly, their mathematical equivalent of panic. But your commercial presence, your trade agreements." "Our commercial presence," Ashford said, his smile growing slightly wider, "represents our genuine preference for cooperative market development. The Terran Commercial Collective would much rather have trading partners than commercial vassals. We find economic warfare to be wasteful, inefficient, and generally unprofitable for everyone involved." He paused, letting that sink in for a moment before continuing. "However," he said, and the single word carried enough economic weight to make the chamber's artificial gravity feel like it was being leveraged against itself, "our preference for cooperation should not be mistaken for inability to engage in more aggressive market strategies. We are very, very good at economic warfare. We have had considerable practice." The holographic display shifted, showing new data. These were not the clean, efficient market penetrations that had characterized human expansion into galactic commerce. These were scenes from human economic history. Entire industries restructured overnight. Commercial empires that had lasted centuries dissolved in quarterly reports. The remnants of market systems that had made the mistake of attempting to exclude human participation. "This is what happened," Ashford said, his voice carrying no emotion whatsoever, "to the last group of species who decided that humans were too young, too inexperienced, and too primitive to compete in their markets." The chamber was silent except for the sound of various species' breathing apparatus working overtime to process atmosphere that suddenly seemed much thinner. Even General Vex Thor, who had built his reputation on being the most ruthless commercial predator in the sector, was staring at the display with the expression of someone who had just realized they were no longer at the top of the economic food chain. "The Terran Commercial Collective," Ashford continued, "joined galactic commerce because we believed that interstellar trade represented an evolution beyond the primitive need to achieve market dominance through exploitation and manipulation. We embraced your protocols, your regulations, and your established practices because we wanted to be part of something better than the endless cycle of commercial conquest that had characterized our own species' economic development." The professional mask was completely gone now. What remained was something far more dangerous. A human being who had reached the end of his patience with being patronized by species who thought politeness was the same as commercial naivety. "But it appears," he said, his voice carrying a note of disappointment that was somehow more ominous than any hostile takeover could have been, "that galactic commerce is simply a larger version of the same primitive market dynamics that humanity thought it had outgrown. The economically strong exploit the weak, established players suppress innovation, and everyone pretends that this represents the natural order of commercial evolution." High adjudicator Zeth Cole's crystalline harmonics had shifted to frequencies that universal translators marked as existential economic dread. "Mediator Ashford, surely you're not suggesting that the Terran Commercial Collective would—" "What I'm suggesting," Ashford interrupted, his voice cutting through the adjudicator's harmonic protests with the precision of a perfectly executed market manipulation, "is that the Terran Commercial Collective has been operating under a set of assumptions that appear to be fundamentally incorrect about the nature of galactic economic relationships." He turned to face the assembled arbitrators, and for the first time since the session began, they were looking at him not as a junior member of the galactic commercial community, but as something far more dangerous. A human being who had stopped pretending that playing by their rules was anything more than a polite courtesy. "We assumed that this tribunal represented a community of species committed to fair commercial competition. We assumed that trade regulations were designed to promote healthy market dynamics, not to protect established monopolies from legitimate competition. We assumed that our commitment to these principles would be respected and reciprocated." The silence in the chamber was deafening. Every arbitrator present was beginning to understand that they had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of humanity's relationship with galactic commerce. "The evidence suggests," Ashford continued, his tone remaining professional while delivering what amounted to an economic nuclear option, "that these assumptions were naive. It appears that what we interpreted as civilized commerce was actually a form of ritualized market manipulation designed to establish and maintain economic hierarchies between species." General Vex Thor finally found his voice. "You cannot threaten the consortium. We have controlled galactic shipping for—" "Controlled," Ashford repeated, his voice carrying a note of professional curiosity that suggested he was mentally calculating the replacement cost of the consortium's entire commercial infrastructure. "Yes, let's discuss that." The consortium has maintained approximately 12% of galactic commercial market share for the past 400 years. Your total assets are valued at roughly 847 trillion galactic credits across your various enterprises and subsidiaries. Your profit margins average 3.7% annually, which is actually quite impressive for an organization of your size and age. Huh? The casual way he recited the numbers made it clear that humanity had been paying very close attention to their commercial competitors, the kind of attention that market analysts paid to acquisition targets. In the event that the consortium decided to pursue a more aggressive competitive strategy, Ashford continued, his tone suggesting he was discussing quarterly projections rather than the potential economic annihilation of an entire commercial civilization. The Terran Commercial Collective estimates that we could acquire controlling interests in your primary assets within approximately 18 standard months. Complete market integration would require perhaps 3 years, assuming we decided that such consolidation was economically beneficial. The chamber erupted in chaos. Multiple species began speaking at once, their voices blending into a cacophony of commercial outrage, economic fear, and desperate attempts to reassert the market protocols that had suddenly proven to be completely inadequate for the situation they now faced. Ashford waited for the noise to subside, his expression patient but implacable. When the chamber finally quieted, he continued as if nothing had happened. "Of course," he said, his professional smile returning, but somehow managing to be more unsettling than any hostile takeover threat. "The Terran Commercial Collective has no intention of pursuing such aggressive market strategies. We remain committed to fair competition and mutual commercial prosperity among all galactic trading partners." The assembled arbitrators stared at him, trying to process the cognitive whiplash of being threatened with economic annihilation and then offered continued partnership in the same breath. "However," Ashford added, and that single word carried the weight of human economic history behind it, "our commitment to fair competition should not be mistaken for commercial weakness, market naivety, or inability to respond to genuine threats to our legitimate business interests. We have been polite because we choose to be polite. We have been cooperative because we prefer cooperation. We have followed your regulations because we believe in the possibility of civilized commerce." He paused, letting the implications settle like compound interest. "But politeness, cooperation, and regulatory compliance are business decisions, and business decisions can always be re-evaluated." The aftermath was a study in the fluid nature of interstellar economics. Within minutes of Ashford's revelation, the entire commercial dynamic of the tribunal had shifted. The casual condescension that had characterized most species' economic relationships with humanity evaporated, replaced by the kind of careful respect that traders show to entities that could buy their entire civilization and use it for spare parts. The Vorthak complaint about human trading practices was quietly withdrawn. The consortium's accusations of economic terrorism were revealed to be based on incomplete market analysis and cultural misunderstandings about competitive practices. The ethereal collective suddenly discovered that their concerns about human market penetration were actually quite reasonable and easily addressed through existing commercial frameworks. Trade Mediator Ashford accepted these developments with the same professional courtesy he had displayed at the beginning of the session, as if the past hour had been nothing more than a routine commercial negotiation. His demeanor shifted back to the pleasant, cooperative manner that had made him so popular among the tribunal's administrative staff, though now everyone understood that his courtesy was a strategic choice rather than a commercial limitation. "I'm pleased that we've been able to resolve these concerns so efficiently," he said, his voice carrying the warm satisfaction of someone who had just concluded a successful business deal. "The Terran Commercial Collective looks forward to continuing our mutually profitable relationships with all members of the galactic trading community." The irony was not lost on anyone present. Humanity's commercial politeness had been revealed to be not a sign of inexperience or cultural limitation, but rather a sophisticated form of market management. The species that everyone had been lecturing about, established commercial practices, had actually been exercising a level of economic restraint that was almost incomprehensible to civilizations that had never needed to develop such self-control. As the tribunal concluded its session, and the various arbitrators began to file out, the conversations in the corridors took on a notably different character. The Vorthak discussed the need to recalibrate their assessment of human market capabilities. The ethereal collective wondered aloud about the implications of a species that could apparently dominate markets and diplomacy with equal effectiveness. The Silicon Confederacy's members processed data streams that their analysis systems identified as respectful commercial concern. The consortium representatives, notably, had very little to say and seemed primarily focused on reaching their transport as quickly as possible, presumably to begin emergency economic impact assessments. Trade Mediator Ashford remained in the chamber for several minutes after the official session ended, apparently reviewing his notes and preparing for the next day's commercial agenda. To any casual observer, he appeared to be exactly what he had always seemed, a competent, professional trade representative going about his duties with quiet efficiency. The only difference was that now everyone understood that his quiet efficiency extended to significantly more than just filling out commercial regulatory forms in triplicate. The Interstellar Commerce Tribunal had always prided itself on maintaining the delicate balance of galactic trade relationships. As the station's lights dimmed to simulate the day-night cycle that most species found conducive to productive economic analysis, the assembled arbitrators retreated to their quarters with a new understanding of what productive actually meant in the context of human commercial relationships. It turned out that true commercial civilization wasn't about maintaining established market hierarchies or protecting ancient monopolies from innovative competition. It was about choosing cooperation when you had the economic power to choose otherwise. And humanity, it seemed, had been making that choice every single day since they had joined the galactic marketplace. The fact that they could choose differently, well, that was a market analysis for another quarterly report, preferably one conducted with significantly more respect for human commercial capabilities than had been demonstrated in the previous session. After all, politeness was a business decision, and in the galaxy of interstellar commerce, business decisions were the only ones that really mattered. The Interstellar Commerce Tribunal existed in that peculiar space where bureaucracy meets cosmic pretension, housed within the gleaming chrome nightmare that was Eclipse-Station. Orbiting the dead star Arcturus 7, the station represented everything that advanced galactic civilization held dear: endless committees, Byzantine regulations, and the comforting illusion that paperwork could somehow prevent wars. Eclipse-Station had been designed by a committee, which explained why it looked like someone had asked 17 different species to build a space station and then welded all their ideas together with hope and industrial adhesive. The Vorthak Syndicate had insisted on crystalline spires that jutted from the station's hull like frozen lightning. The ethereal collective demanded flowing organic curves that seemed to breathe in the vacuum of space. The silicon-based confederacy had contributed geometric blocks that appeared to have been carved from pure mathematics. And then there were the human sections, which looked like someone had built a particularly efficient office building and launched it into space. The fact that these unremarkable modules housed some of the most sophisticated economic analysis equipment in the known galaxy was a detail that most species had somehow overlooked. The tribunal itself operated on the principle that commerce was the great civilizer of the galaxy. After all, when species were busy making money together, they were generally too occupied to blow each other up. This was a remarkably optimistic view of sentient nature, considering that most galactic wars had started over trade disputes. But optimism was one of the tribunal's founding principles, right alongside bureaucratic inefficiency and the firm belief that any problem could be solved with the proper form filled out in triplicate. Trade Mediator Marcus Ashford represented the Terran commercial collective with the kind of understated competence that made other species vaguely uncomfortable without being able to articulate why. He possessed that particularly human trait of appearing completely ordinary while somehow managing to be the most prepared person in any given room. His suits were unremarkable, his briefcase was standard issue, and his smile suggested the kind of professional courtesy that came from years of dealing with beings who considered themselves inherently superior to whatever species happened to be standing in front of them. What the galactic community had interpreted as human deference in commercial matters was actually something far more sophisticated. Humans had learned early in their interstellar career that when you're dealing with species who measure their civilizations in millennia, it's generally wise to let them feel superior while you quietly corner 40% of their market share. The monthly dispute resolution session was supposed to be routine maintenance for the galaxy's commercial ecosystem. The Vortarch Syndicate had filed a formal complaint about human trading practices in the Centauri Commerce Zone, claiming that Terran merchants were engaging in what they termed economically disruptive behavior. This was the sort of bureaucratic language that the tribunal used when they wanted to say, "These people are making too much money and we're not sure how they're doing it." High Judicator Zeth Kol of the Vorthak Syndicate entered the chamber with the kind of presence that suggested he had personally negotiated several stellar trade agreements before most species had discovered currency. The Vorthak were descended from what could charitably be described as crystalline spiders, if spiders had evolved in zero gravity and developed an obsession with compound interest. Zeth Kol's form shifted and glittered as he moved, his multiple limbs manipulating data tablets with the precision of someone who had spent centuries turning numbers into power. "Esteemed colleagues," Zeth Kol began, his voice carrying the harmonic resonance that made Vorthak's speech sound like a cash register having an existential crisis. "We convene today to address what can only be described as aggressive market manipulation by our newest commercial partners." Senior Arbitrix Quelnara of the Ethereal Collective manifested as a shifting pattern of light and probability that hurt to look at directly. The Ethereals communicated through quantum fluctuations that their translation devices converted into something resembling words, though the effect was rather like being lectured by a particularly judgmental aurora. The humans demonstrate a concerning lack of respect for established commercial hierarchies. Their rapid expansion into traditionally regulated sectors suggests either remarkable ignorance or deliberate disregard for galactic trade customs. Chief Moderator Brickstar of the Silicon-based Confederacy appeared as a geometric arrangement of floating crystal matrices that occasionally formed patterns resembling facial expressions. When they spoke, their voice sounded like a computer trying to explain why it had achieved sentience. Analysis indicates that human commercial behavior operates outside recognized parameters. Their profit margins exceed theoretical maximums while maintaining customer satisfaction ratings that approach statistical impossibility.